Nice. Great post.
Okay, we're starting. Okay, I think we're live. Hello, everyone. This is On Neuro, the live online neuroscience and psychology conference. Thanks very much for tuning in. I'm Paul Scotti, and I'm joined by my co-host.
Hi, I'm Molly McKinney. Today our presenter is Dr. Stephen Adamo. Could you please say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself, Stephen?
Hello. So right now I'm a postdoc at the George Washington University. Before that, I did my PhD at Duke University under the guidance of Stephen Mitroff. And before that, I was at the University of Arizona. I've been, a researcher for quite some time now and have gone from studying very basic things to more applied type things to working with radiologists and working with TSA agents. And so I'm pretty excited to talk to you today about my research.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Thanks very much. Yeah, super glad to have you with us. So just as people are coming in the first couple of minutes here, I thought that we would talk about some general news that has surfaced over the past month related to neuroscience and psychology. One thing that was pretty surprising, Stephen, did you hear about the scandal regarding Philip Zimbardo and the prison experiment?
Yeah. My advisor sent an email out about that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that was something.
Why don't you give a brief summary of what happened, Paul, in case anybody didn't hear about it?
Yeah, of course. Basically, just a couple highlights for people who haven't been aware of what happened. There were previously... Basically, the famous landmark study from Philip Zimbardo, he had people, this was years and years ago before the IRB, and so he was allowed to do somewhat fishy practices, right? And so he took he took these students at Stanford, made some of them prisoners, made some of them guards, and what he was trying to show were the results is that the guards, even without prompting, took full advantage of the situation, and within a few days they transitioned from regular, ordinary students into very barbaric, cruel guards who were taking advantage of the prisoners who had no free volition to either quit the experiment or do anything against the guards. And so it's been used as an example of how people in authority can become, abusers of their power. And it's been used to explain things like Nazi camps where the people in authority were just completely brutal and taking advantage of people. But what was recently found out and published in public media, at least, there were previously unpublished recordings from Zimbardo that showed that the guards in the experiment were actually coached to be cruel from Zimbardo and the people affiliated with Zimbardo himself. So the entire premise that people put into a position of power trend towards becoming hateful, cruel figures isn't supported necessarily. And multiple labs have attempted to disprove the study and replicate it under less barbaric conditions in the past couple of years, but it just has never made public eye, for instance. But these recordings really show that we can't take their findings, their results, at face value for what Zimbardo has been trying to show. And this study has been in every introductory psychology book you can imagine. And it's really interesting that we shouldn't be teaching it anymore, essentially, if we are trying to showcase this result for the implications that have been attempted to be concluded from the study. Another highlight from it, not as huge of a highlight, but there was one prisoner who infamously had a mental breakdown, and it was in even the movie. So this one prisoner just completely lost it. What movie?
Yeah, I forgot. I've seen it. I just forgot the name of it.
I think it wasn't it just called Stanford Prison Experiment, maybe?
I think so.
Okay. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I thought there was another movie that was similar to that, but I don't know.
But yeah, the one prisoner who had a mental breakdown, it wasn't because he had a mental breakdown. He admitted publicly that it was because he only signed up for the study so that he could study for the GREs. It was a good excuse to have time dedicated to studying, but then he didn't get his textbooks and stuff. And so when he realized that he couldn't voluntarily leave, he had to fake a mental breakdown, is what he said. And that's the reason.
I thought there was also a thing about, like, there was a very specific phrase that the participants had to say, but they were not told in the consent form or anything what the phrase was. And so if they had ever said this specific phrase, they would have been allowed. It was just like very, like,
yeah, so
tricky business.
So Phil had tried to explain that they were able to leave at any time if only they read the consent form and knew the exact wording to leave.
Right.
But when you actually look at the consent forms, which have now been publicly posted by on his own website, it doesn't say anything about this phrase. He kind of screwed himself over, really, by making it public, which makes you think how many things are not being made public that we haven't been aware of. Yeah. And also now
So
he works as like he works in
terms of neuroscience community.
Yeah, in terms of psychology, he's now heading a movement to try and make a nonprofit organization to promote heroism in everyday life. But it makes you think, how valid are his research efforts in this regard? But anyway, not to spend too much time on it, the other thing I briefly wanted to mention was that PyCortex has been officially released. This is probably more relevant to people who work with brain data, with fMRI, but this is a great visualizer that for visualizing functional data on brain surfaces, put out by Gao, Huth, Les Groart, and Gallant. I'm just going to show some of the visualizations that are now, the code is open source on GitHub. For instance,
PyCortex is a software for viewing the brain.
Yeah, exactly. So if you wanted to make pretty figures or 3D visualize your subject's brain with the functional data that you have, you can. Here's an example of retinotopic mapping, and here is an example of just an entirely 3D head with their brain inflated, and you can unfold it and play around with it, and it just looks very pretty.
Yeah.
So if people have brain data and they want to visualize their results, this is a pretty cool program that's now just become publicly available in the last month.
Brilliant. That's great.
Okay, so without further ado, let's get to the main presentation. We have Stephen Adamo presenting his work, and let me just change over to the slide, and Stephen, you can take it away.
Great. So I'm excited today to talk to you about that work I've done at the George Washington University in collaboration with the radiology department. Now in this task, we use both radiologists and undergraduates in a cognitive psychology paradigm that we hope is going to help and inform how radiologists search for cancer. Now, before I get into specifics of this task, I first kind of want to talk to you about the motivation behind all this. Is can we use undergraduates or non-professionals on these cognitive psychology paradigms to help and inform radiology? Now, kind of the reason we want to do this is, first of all, when you're looking at things within radiology, there's a lot of hurdles you have to overcome. First of all, radiologists can be quite expensive when running in our task. It can be upwards of $200 an hour. And in addition to that, they have very, very little free time to do it. So if you ever look at any radiology papers, you'll see that they typically have like maybe 5 to 10 radiologists in their tasks. And that's just because they spend all day doing their job, and then afterwards they really don't want to do a cognitive psychology paradigm. And finally, when running studies within radiology, it can be quite difficult to get the stimuli you need. So if I'm running a study on, maybe breast cancer detection, I first have to go through and get approval from patients to use their images to run in a study, and to get the specific, images I need for my particular study. It can be quite time consuming, take upwards of years to do. So what our lab has done is, what we typically do is we take something from the real world, such as radiology or something from the TSA. We look at something that happens there, bring it back to the lab, program it up, replicate what we see within that specific field, such as radiology. And then if we can replicate that basic result, we then go and test a bunch of different things and bring it back to help and inform them. So this recipe is what we use in the past. And so to begin to kind of show you why we do this, I first will talk about something we've done within our lab, and then use that to cue into the actual study. So what we've done in our lab in the past is we looked at something called satisfaction of search, or as we renamed, subsequent search misses. And what this is that they've known for over 50 years within radiology that if you find one cancer or abnormality, you're much more likely to miss an additional one. So take the example of the image on the left. That's an example of where a cancer may be. It's very difficult to find for radiologists. But if you look at the image on the right, you see this little circle where the arrow is. And the idea is, if you find that little more obvious sign, a more obvious abnormality, you're much more likely to miss a second abnormality compared to if you hadn't found one at all. So in other words, what we did within the lab is we went replicated this result. And instead of having undergraduates look for through actual medical images, obviously that'd be quite difficult to do, and they're not trained to do that. So we asked them to look for T-shaped targets amongst L-shaped distractors. And so as you kind of see here, this would be an example of a target, and they're asked to look for targets like these amongst these distractors. And we typically present 1 or 2 targets in any trial, and we have 2 different target types. We have the low salience, harder to find T, or the high salience, high salience, more easy to find T. So kind of for an example of what we have observers do, I want you all out there to kind of view our display and try to find the different T's within the display. And I'll kind of pretend like you're a participant. So everyone, ready? Go. So here you'll be looking for the T-shaped targets. I'm going to give you a few seconds to look. Okay, so out there, I'm guessing a lot of people were able to find this T, but I'm guessing a lot of you may have missed the second one right here. And so this is typically what we find within our task, that if you find that one colored in blue or is highlighted in blue, you're much more likely to miss the second one compared to if this one wasn't present within the display at all. And so the likelihood of missing that second T compared to if there's one present is what we call the subsequent search miss effect. So here's an example of our subsequent search miss results, is that we see that with that T, that low salience T is by itself, the hit rate is much higher compared to when they found that dark one first. The hit rate is much lower, and that difference between the two is called the subsequent search miss effect. So again, as I was saying before, they've known this within radiology for 50 years, that if you find one target, you're more likely to miss another one. We replicated that within a cognitive psychology paradigm that we had complete control over. And so with that, we were able to run a bunch of different studies to not only figure out why this is happening, but what different things affected it. So say, for example, kind of going back to maybe that prison experiment, we ran one study where we put people under threat of shock. And what we found is that when they were more anxious under threat of shock, this exacerbated the SSM effect, where they're more likely to miss that second one. Other things we've looked at is how attention plays into this, and kind of figured out theoretically why this is happening, which is kind of cool because we're able to then bring this back to radiology, which I'll get to in a second. So again, kind of the reason behind this is, can we replicate a basic result from radiology to then study this more and have complete control over why this is, to better understand why this is happening? So the current study I'm talking about today is new techniques in breast cancer detection. And so what it is that they have mammography, which is the image on the left, which is a 2D image. And what they do is take the entirety of the breast tissue, they condense it into one 2D image, and they ask radiologists to look for signs of cancer. They've done this for quite some time, and this has kind of been the tool of choice for looking for breast cancer. However, the image on the right is the newest technique in breast cancer detection, where instead of taking the entirety of the breast image and putting it into one single slice, is that they take it and they segment it into many, many different slices. And what you see here is a radiologist zooming with their mouse wheel and scrolling in and out of the image, going from slice to slice, looking for breast cancer. Therefore, they're allowing them to search in depth for cancer, where before the 2D image just simply wasn't possible. And so radiologists, this has been out for, not very many years, but since then, they've had a few studies really trying to figure out what are the differences between these two techniques, and is tomosynthesis better? And what they found is that with tomosynthesis, you see a reduction of false positives or false alarms, which is they're less likely to say there's cancer present in an image when there actually isn't. And this is quite important because obviously people don't want to be told that they have cancer and under any regard, and then worry about it and stress out about it to find out that this wasn't true. So there's a reduction in that. Also, there's an improvement in breast cancer detection with this tomosynthesis, which is great. They're finding cancer more often, but it comes at the cost that it takes them longer to search. And this can be quite troublesome for radiology, is because typically when you're a radiologist, you have so many scans that you have to go through within a day. And if you incrementally add time to each of them, it could take them quite longer, stress them out more. They report that they're more anxious, maybe more stressed out while doing this. And overall, this can be quite bad for the field if it takes them longer for each scan. But, these are the pros and cons of doing it. So what we wanted to do within our lab is to begin to study what are the differences between these two, and is there anything else beneficial with tomosynthesis, is that we wanted to replicate that basic result that I just showed you, but we wanted to do it with our T and L stimuli to begin to really understand, if we can replicate it, can we really begin to understand what's going on? Furthermore, we want to do this both with professionals and non-professionals. So if we find results with maybe professionals, are they going to differ than non-professionals, or they show the similar patterns in behavior? And if so, if we can run non-professionals or undergraduates on this task, we can begin to predict how radiologists may do with actual medical images. So what we did is we programmed a study up, and we ran it both with professionals and non-professionals. Our professional participants, we had 27 radiologists actually, which is quite a lot. And that's because they let us go to the Radiological Society of North America, and that's in Chicago every year. And we set up a little booth, and we got radiologists to participate in our task for 30 minutes at a time. And we gave them a chance to win prizes and maybe $100 Amazon gift card here or there. And we got 13 residents and 14 certified radiologists. And we had a range of specialties ranging for people that look for breast cancer to general radiologists, which is common in other countries where they just kind of look through a bunch of different images. We had many different types of radiologists. Now, for our non-professionals or undergraduates, we had 31 of those, and they were at the George Washington University. And importantly, they all said they had no radiological experience. Well, actually, one person said they did. I think they're lying, but regardless, I just threw them out. I don't want to take a chance. But anyways, so we had 31 undergraduates whose data we looked at who had no radiological experience. So for our study stimuli, if you take a mammogram here, this is what it looks like. This is what we use within our 2D displays. Is similar to what you saw before, is we had observers look for those T-shaped targets amongst L-shaped distractors. And for our 3D displays, that this was the tomosynthesis, is that we programmed something up within MATLAB, and we programmed the sphere, and then we cut it up into many different slices. And we had radiologists go from slice to slice looking for that T-shaped target. And they use the mouse wheel to do this because that's what they do within radiology. And so when they go through and they found that T-shaped target, as you can see the little mouse over there, they go through and they click on it, indicating that they found it or they did not find it. So for our basic design, we had 100 items within the search, and there could either be 0 or 1 target. As I said before, there's a 2D display where everything was condensed into one image, or a 3D display where they're kind of spread out across many different slices. And we had 12 2D and 12 3D trials with a 60-second time limit. So again, as a reminder, what we're looking for is that you see within radiology, within tomosynthesis, you see a decrease in false alarms. So we looked at the false alarm rate, and that's where they clicked on a distractor thinking it was a target. We looked at the hit rate, so how often they actually found the target, to then see, as a kind of improvement in breast cancer detection. We looked at the target hit rate. And then as longer time spent searching, we looked at the target absent response time. So that is when there's no targets present, how long would our observers search on their own accord before determining that there wasn't a target there? So get the results is that if we look at the false alarm rate on the y-axis and 2D versus 3D on the x-axis, what we found is both professionals in the blue and non-professionals is that they made more false alarms within the 2D compared to the 3D displays, and that there's no difference between the groups. For the hit rate, what we found is that both professionals and non-professionals were more accurate within the 3D displays. And again, no difference between the groups and no interaction there. And finally, what we found is that with both professionals and non-professionals, they took longer within the 3D displays. And again, there's no difference between the groups. So going back to that slide I showed you before, is that we basically replicated the results for all the three main findings from radiology, and we found no difference between professionals and non-professionals. Now, when we wrote this paper up, we said that, and because that's kind of cool, because we can to extrapolate, and say, hey, if non-professionals perform this way, we can begin to predict how professionals may do. We'll just say they had the same pattern of performance, because radiologists, when writing this, they don't like to say, you don't like hearing that, undergraduates did just as well as they did. So, they did show the same pattern of performance, and that is a key aspect of that. And I'll be happy to talk about that later. But again, there's obviously differences between actual medical images and the displays we use. So in the second experiment, what we did is we used a more realistic background. And we took this background from a MATLAB code and is rated by radiologists to look more authentic to an actual mammogram. And so we used that background within our displays. And so we ran this again at George Washington University, but this time we used just non-professionals. And what we found is with false alarm rates, they made more false alarms in the 2D compared to the 3D displays. They had a higher hit rate in 3D displays, and they had a longer target absent response time. So again, we replicated the basic result. So some data I'll be showing you now is kind of revisiting that past experiment I showed you is the subsequent search misses. So since we replicated this basic result, now we can kind of ask some cool questions is, hey, what happens when we throw two targets in there? Let's look at the subsequent search miss effect and see how it differs between 2D versus 3D. And then, by looking at this, we begin to predict how radiologists may do in these actual medical images because we've already replicated the basic results you see within radiology. So going to the slide here, as you can see the subsequent search miss slide I showed you before, or just showed you, is on the top right corner. And we're looking at the hit rate here. And what we found is that within these 2D displays, we find this typical subsequent search miss effect, where they are more likely to miss a second target if they found a first target beforehand, compared to when the target is just by itself within the display. However, within the 3D displays, we didn't find this result at all. Instead, we found no subsequent search miss effect, suggesting that when searching in 3D, you're less likely to make this error within radiology that has been known for over the past 50 years, and they really haven't found a good way to get rid of. Yet, with our results suggest that they may actually be able to get rid of this result, get rid of this error when searching within 3D. We're writing this paper up right now, but I just kind of wanted to tell you guys about this cool result because I'm quite excited about it. So in general, why does this matter? So first of all, with this study, we're able to test non-professionals on these cognitive psychology tasks and begin to predict how radiologists may do within an actual medical images. In our study, we showed there's no difference in the pattern of performance between radiologists and undergraduates, and this will allow us to, kind of maybe suggest what they may do within the actual medical images. Furthermore, as we have complete control over our stimuli, when you use real medical images, you typically don't because you have to find the ones that suit the particular question you're asking. But with our program is we can program anything in there to begin to really look at situations that may not be that frequent to situations more frequent. And that's great. That's really beneficial for us because that really opens up our future line of research and questions we may ask. So one question we may ask is what happens when an image is more dense or less dense? So within radiology, this is something that happens all the time is that there's different levels of breast density. And as you can imagine, the more dense the breast tissue is, the more difficult it is to search for signs of cancer. We can ask the question, well, hey, if you have 3D, Should they get better? Because now you can search in depth within these 3D images, and maybe where with mammography, you can't necessarily do that. Another question we may ask is, well, what happens when the target is super, super, super infrequent? Well, with radiologists, that may be a difficult question to ask because you have to have many, many, many different trials where they're looking through mostly images that have no target in there or no signs of cancer. Yet we can just do this with undergraduates, give them course credit for participating in our studies, and throw hundreds and hundreds of trials up there and see how they do within these images. So those are some future directions we want to head. But overall, I'd like to thank you all for paying attention, and also thank my collaborators on this project and the Ford Foundation, who gave me money to do the study. They're a minority fellowship group that gives money for graduate students and postdocs to do research. So if any of you out there are minority, feel free to ask me any questions, or because they'll fund you a lot of money to do research, both as a graduate student and as a postdoc. And I'd also like to thank my lab for allowing me to run the study.
Wow.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Oh, no problem.
It didn't seem like there were many questions. I think you did an amazing job keeping this at a level where everyone can understand, and we really, really appreciate that, because the idea is to make it possible for everyone to know what's going on in the field, and it's a really cool study that you've done.
Yeah, that's pretty much all the research I've done is with those two paradigms that I showed you. That's the breadth of my research. Is I went through and studied subsequent search misses, began to replicate the results, tried to figure out theoretically what was happening. Once I did that, I tried to say theoretically this should get rid of those errors, and this 3D imaging allowed a particular way of getting rid of it. And yeah, we found that this wasn't happening. So it's great because we're working with radiologists, and it's quite exciting because we're writing this paper up right now. And so it's kind of, my research has gone full circles from radiology to the lab back to radiology again.
Very nice. Yeah, if anybody listening has questions, please post them in the chat. And thanks again, Stephen.
It looks like we have one from ILR. The question was, what were the instructions, and did anyone you tell them that there could be one target or more or not? And then what do you think is the mechanism in 3D that enables to reduce the SSM effect?
Okay, so the instructions for the first one is that pretty much what I told y'all. They had 0-1 targets to look for. For the latest results I presented, we told them there's up to 2 targets per search. And what they would do is they go through, and if they clicked on one, or they would go through, if they didn't see any targets, they would just press the space bar to continue on to the next image. If they found one but didn't find a second one, then they would click on the one they found or they thought they found, and then press the space bar to continue. And finally, if they found both of them, and once they made 2 clicks, then it'd just go on to the next trial. So they knew there's up to 2 targets in there. And the mechanism behind why this happens is it's a little bit of a story, but to kind of in general, what we predict happens is that when you find one target, your brain automatically goes into search mode for that particular type of target. So although I just use T's here, we've run this study before with a similar study with TSA agents. And we had them look for hundreds of different types of targets. And what we found is that when they find, let's say, a gun, their brain would go in gun mode, and they'd mainly look for targets that were similar to that first target. Okay? And so therefore they'd maybe more likely to miss a bomb compared to a gun. Now, going back to what we found here is that what we suspect is happening is that when they find that first target, and that first target is always within view, is that they go into that mode and they look for that particular type of target. So in the case where it's 2D, if that first target is always on the screen and they find it, they're using important cognitive resources to maintain that first target in memory and searching for targets similar. Therefore, using up those critical resources that are necessary to find a second target. However, when you look within 3D, if you find a first target, and although you may be processing it with attention and memory resources at the time, when you scroll past it and keep it out of sight, you free up those resources, thereby allowing you to find that second target and making you more likely to find it. That's in general what we think is happening, but I am writing up that paper as we speak, and it's called the Flux capacitor theory, which hopefully will be coming out this year later on.
Cool. If you, let's say that there was a 2D search, and instead of, let's say that when they were reporting the targets that they find, they use the mouse to click on the target, and after they click on it, the target disappears. Do you think because it's no longer on the screen that there would be no more SSM errors?
Yeah, that's Kane and Mitroff 2013.
I see.
That's exactly what we showed. Is so when they find a target and it automatically is removed, then they're more likely to find that second target. And while that's easy for us to do within our task, within radiology, that's kind of weird, right? Because if you try to just remove like besides without using segmented 3D searching or tomosynthesis, imagine a mammogram and you just try to like remove it from the screen after finding it, but yet maintaining nothing different from the display. It can be quite difficult to do. So that's exactly what we'd expect though, Paul, is that if you remove it from the screen, once you find it, you're more likely to find that second one. And that's where we kind of got this result of this is how you alleviate these errors.
I see. We have another question from Lisa. Have you tried adding a time pressure or minimum number of reads that need to be done? Would this lead to SSM errors since people might not continue searching through the stack of images?
So in this case,
the question was asked by someone who also is interested in doing radiology studies. So you can certainly voice your answer in a way to assist this research if you like.
So I believe in the past we've added time pressure. I don't know if the studies ever came out, but yeah, time pressure seems to exacerbate the effect. But what I didn't get into is, is the question about time pressure for satisfaction of search errors or subsequent search misses, or is this with Adamo versus Tomo? What's the question about in particular?
Talking about SSM errors?
Yeah. So time pressure does exacerbate the effect. Within 2D versus 3D, I would imagine it would exacerbate the effect with within the 3D displays. And that's simply because if you made it less time, they may not be able to have the time to get through all the 3D displays. So as we know, it takes a little bit longer to search within 3D displays. So imagine if they had a time pressure of like 15 seconds, right? Before we had a minute. They may be able to get through a little bit of the image. So that would definitely make them more likely to miss it. Mm-hmm. But also what I didn't get into is that these errors were initially believed to be caused because observers quit searching after finding a first target. So the idea was that they were satisfied, they find one target, and they prematurely terminated their search before finding a second target. I've run studies since then that suggest that can be a cause of these errors. And in the theory I'm proposing, I can explain why this happens. But in general, yes, if there is a time pressure, they will probably be more likely to miss it because they'll prematurely terminate the search earlier after finding a first target.
Okay, I have a really basic question.
Yeah.
When a radiologist finds the target, that means that there's something to look into. So what is the motivation of finding a second target once they find something they have to biopsy, do they only go for that specific node that they found, and that's the problem, is that they need to be looking into both of them? Okay.
Yeah, potentially. So, this can occur within, breast cancer, but it could also occur, let's say, within trauma patients who, have been in a bad accident. Yeah, they could find one, break or whatever, but if they miss a second one, that could be quite problematic. And they know within radiology, yeah, sure, they could find one cancer, they may biopsy it and remove that cancer, but if they don't remove the other cancer, then it'll continue to spread. And a lot of times when this happens, they have to go back and look at previous years and say, you know what, we found that one cancer, but that one over there, we didn't find it. Uh-oh. So they can kind of realize what happens, and especially the insurance companies want to know what happens too. And for cases of lawsuits, they want to know if they've missed something before. So yeah, they can find one thing.
That's fascinating. So but see, my assumption as a layperson is that if they find something, then they're going to do some really extensive search in the entire area. But what you're saying is they find something and then they just target that area, get paid, and move on. They don't go more in depth to find more potential.
Yeah. So for my basic understanding is that, they will look more off, they're going to look for the whole thing, but there are still ways of missing it, right? It may be a very subtle cancer. It may be within a high dense, dense tissue area or fatty tissue area. They're more likely to miss it. It all comes down to some level of the human element, the human factor in it, that if they do find one, then may go and just biopsy that area as opposed to removing the entire breast. Obviously that's, maybe last resort, but they'll look harder, but they still may miss it.
Amazing. Does anyone have follow-up questions?
Do you think that radiologists are going to look at your work and actually make changes? Because one of the things that I was thinking about is it takes a lot longer, right, to search through 3D segmented images. So is it worth the cost of the increased time to search to eliminate SSM errors?
Well, if it can save lives, probably. It comes down to the cost benefit analysis of this, but if it can save lives, yeah. So when I go to these conferences, I talk to them a lot about this and say, and a lot of them are very, very excited for this 3D style of searching. Before it wasn't in all the hospitals, but now it's getting more and more common, and insurance companies are now covering this cost to run tomosynthesis, where before it was almost more of a luxury and they'd have to pay for it out of pocket. I'm not sure if that's the case anymore. I don't think so. But radiologists obviously got their job for a reason. If they can be better at their job and do a better job and save lives, yeah, they definitely will. A lot of them have asked me when running this task and this task, but can you please send us the paper when this comes out? Can you please send us out? We want to know what happens. We want to know if we should be doing something different. It's amazing how excited they get when running these tasks. And it just, maybe as a whole, that radiologists who read these papers, yeah, they definitely adjust their styles and how they do things.
All right.
Great. Really relevant and crucial research. This is so fascinating.
Yeah, I like it. It's good for getting funding because I'm able to show the impact of my work, talk about the theory of what happens, and say, theoretically, this is how you can then bring it back to the real world and actually make a difference with it.
Yeah, I there's a lot of different avenues that you can take with this work, and hopefully it actually can make a difference for radiologists, and you might be saving lives with this sort of work.
That's the hope. So far yet, we haven't seen any papers come out looking at static or subsequent search misses and tomosynthesis and mammography. And so we're writing this paper up right now as we speak, and hopefully going to get out soon, because it'd be nice to get it out there before the radiologists do, and hopefully we show similar results.
Yeah, because probably radiologists most don't know, one, about SSM errors, what they are, or two, I don't know if they're looking into basic research about the ways that they could be improving their performance.
SSM errors. They actually do. They just may not call it that. So, for example, I was running a radiologist in a study, and I was kind of telling him about this, and he's like, "Oh, the butterfly effect." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Oh, when you see the butterfly and you miss other things, like that's what I call my, I talk to my residents about this, it's like you find that one's cancer and it's like the butterfly, it's attracting your attention, and you're more likely to miss the second one." I'm like, "Oh, that's called this." And he's like, "Oh, I didn't know that, but this is what we call it." So they kind of know what they're doing. They're there behind this is their job. This is their life. They do this every day. So they know what's happening. They know when they're more likely to miss something and less likely to miss something. So they kind of know of it. They may have not read the papers, but they definitely know what it is.
I see. Well, I mean, that's a good thing that they're being aware of where they might be messing up. It's a good sign.
Yeah. That would be the hope, right?
Yeah. And they're probably more willing to believe your work if they have the hunch that this is a thing capable of making them do better at their job.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a big selling point. So when running radiologists and tasks, it's very important to really appeal to what they do each and every day. So, like, for example, when creating this program, one thing we wanted to make sure we did is use the mouse wheel to scroll in and out of the images. Why? We could use the button, right? Like, we can use the button to change from slice to slice within that 3D, but by using the mouse wheel, that's what they do. And the more similar you can make it to what they do, the more likely they're to buy in your study and buy into what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Do any listeners have any questions before we wrap things up? Please type them in. It's your chance. Do you have any closing comments, Stephen?
No, just if anyone wants to reach out to me that has any other further questions or has any questions about grad school or postdocing in general. A lot of this work I've done has helped me get lots of grants and fellowships, such as National Science Foundation, the Ford Fellowship Foundation. They gave me their fellowships. So most of the work has been paid for. If you have any questions about writing those essays or questions about getting into research in general or doing more applied type research or more basic type research, been doing this for quite some time, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions or help anyone.
Yeah, do you mind if we post your email address in the Discord afterwards so I can reach out?
Sure. I also, there's a link to this. This paper just came out too, in case anyone actually wants to read it. I've got a link to that too. I don't know if you want me to post it, but if they want to read more about the specifics of the study, I just sent you the link to you guys in a personal message. So maybe you want to put that up as well. I think I should have my email address on there as well as the corresponding author.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll post that. I'll put it in the description of the YouTube and on the Discord, as well as like the paper and also the links that I was talking about at the beginning.
Perfect.
Okay, well, thank you again so much for volunteering your time and for the presentation.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime.
Yes, thank you very much. And everyone, thank you for tuning in. We're so happy to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. And we'll be closing off the stream now. Have a good rest of your day.